The release of a new book has put the spotlight on a local athlete who made the NHL as a teenager, as well as the perils of sports gambling. The source was among those in attendance for a recent talk by author Fred Addis, whose new book examines the life of Port Colborne native Don Gallinger.
It's been, 75 years since Gallinger was suspended from the National Hockey League along with Billy Taylor for gambling-related activities back in 1948. There have been a few feature articles in newspapers from time to time, particularly one in the Boston Globe that ran, I think, 1999-ish. But that was perhaps the most in-depth treatment of it, but it too was not as fulsome in detail that I was able to get into in book form.
This is an idea that had been germinating in your head for a couple of decades, I understand.
Yeah, well, I knew Don Gallinger when I lived in Port Colborne back in the 1980s, and so knew of his story, and the more I heard about his story from people, it seemed to me that there were some missing pieces, and I just really wanted to uncover as much as I could. And as I've tried to say, I wanted to balance the narrative about him. That is to say, there was one official version of what happened to him, but I knew there had to be more, and I've tried to present perhaps a different side of the story than we saw in public.
Single-game sports betting has been legal in Canada since August of 2021. The government legislation has opened up the floodgates to betting apps, television ads, and new revenue streams from media conglomerates. Professor Julie Stevens has been monitoring the situation in her role at the Brock University Centre for Sport Capacity.
You're certainly seeing the most recent example of a player in the NHL, Pinto from the Ottawa Senators, being suspended for something questionable, although it's not very clear, but it had to do with gambling. So I think there's not a lot of education going on or leadership by some of these professional sport corporations, enterprises, to guide these athletes entering into the league if they're quite young. Well, not to say older players wouldn't get mixed up in gambling as well, but when they're young, about what is that solid line and not to cross it.
The move to remove prominent athletes from being pitchmen for these betting sites, is that a good move?
Absolutely. I think somehow we need to kind of draw back on this open advertising wave that was enabled the minute the legislation came through to allow this type of online sport betting to go on. And the role model impact is pretty powerful. So when you have young adults and youth watching an athlete that they follow closely endorsing this, they obviously would feel it's a good thing to do. So pulling those voices out of the conversation is an important first step.
Gallinger's banishment from the NHL at the tender age of 22 cut short a promising career that saw him set a record for being the youngest player to score an overtime goal and capture the public's attention as part of the Sprout line before his relationship with a known gambler from Detroit was discovered by the league.
Well, we know he was extremely fast. He was big at 6'1". He could score. He did that. He led the Bruins in scoring one season. And he liked to mix it up. He wasn't afraid of the corners, and apparently he liked to run his mouth as well, and could back it up most days, as most players are able to. But it was more a measure of his level of confidence than of anything that you might call cockiness or arrogance. He was supremely confident in his athletic ability. It had carried him from the playgrounds of Port Colborne to the arenas of the National Hockey League.
As you can imagine, there is much, much more to this story. Look for Gallinger, A Life Suspended at your local bookstore or online at shopoma.org. In Niagara, you're watching The Source on your TV.